You are tuned in to a Fireside chat with Zany Mystic. Join us now on another exciting metaphysical journey. Relax, tune in, drop out, and take a seat by the fire as we explore new realms and possibilities. This is Magenta Pixie. You can find me at magentapixie.weebly.com. But now, here is Zany Mystic and guest. Enjoy the show.
Greetings, and welcome to a Fireside Chat with Zany Mystic. I'm your host, Lance White. Today, my guest is Steve Bhaerman. Steve is an internationally known author, humorist, and workshop leader. For the past 23 years, he has written and performed as Swami Beyondananda, the Cosmic Comic. Swami's comedy has been called irreverently uplifting and has been described both as comedy disguised as wisdom and wisdom disguised as comedy. As the Swami, Steve is the author of Driving Your Own Karma, When You See a Sacred Cow, Milk It for All It's Worth, Duck Soup for the Soul, and Swami for Precedent, a 7-step plan to heal the body politic and cure erectile dysfunction. As Steve Bhaerman, he has recently co-authored a brilliant new book with Dr. Bruce Lipton called Spontaneous Evolution, Our Positive Future, and A Way to Get There from Here. So let's welcome Steve back to the show now. Hi, Steve. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing great. How about you?
I'm okay. It's a nice, beautiful day outside. So yes, I'm doing all right.
Well,
I'm still working on your wonderful new book, and so far it's enlightening, funny, and solid science.
Well, that's good. It took Bruce and I 3.5 years to write it, so it's understandable if it takes you a little while to read it.
Well, I only have one complaint.
Yes. Let's hear it.
It's just me. This is a silly story, but you know that picture of the old hag and that turns into the young woman?
That's right.
I never did see the young woman. I stared and stared and stared and stared at that thing, and I could not see her. So, you know, I think there's something wrong with me. I better go see my doctor.
Or maybe see a paradox.
Yeah, there you go. So what prompted you to co-author the book with Dr. Lipton?
Well, you know, I think we just basically got a message from the universe. I met Bruce about 5 years ago, and we just started a conversation, and we realized that we both had interest in spirituality, Bruce coming more from the science perspective, and coming more from the psychological perspective, and we realized that we had similar and intertwining views in relation to politics. And so we began this conversation, and, you know, I've always had this serious side to me. My background was in political science. I was involved in alternative education. I was a freelance writer and so on. And having really developed the Swami part of my personality, my multiple personality, and also really looking at these tremendously transformational times that we're living in right now, and you know that we've seen a lot of political dysfunction. We've seen institutions that are not really that actually don't do what they're supposed to do. We have a healthcare system that's unhealthy and uncaring. You know, we have a banking system that. My brother works for the Bankers Association, and the joke that's circulating around there is, remember the good old days when people robbed banks? You know, so there's a lot of dysfunction going on, and there needed. I felt that I wanted to be able to use my expertise and so on to bring some light to that, and in having Bruce as a co-author in bringing his really brilliant science, and we offer a foundational perspective for a new story that we are on the cusp of a spontaneous evolution, kind of like a spontaneous remission, where we emerge to a higher and more intelligent level of organization, and we have science pointing us the way that every phase of evolution from the single-cell organisms deciding that they don't want to be single anymore and becoming multi-cell organisms, to organisms, aggregations of cells as complicated as you or me, a community of 50 trillion cells. That's you and me and everybody listening. So every phase of evolution involves increased awareness and increased connection. And so if we extrapolate evolution out into the future, human evolution doesn't involve necessarily growing a bigger brain or an extra limb or something like that. It really involves expanding awareness and community to the point of recognizing that we are each and all cells in a new superorganism called humanity. And if you begin to look at things from that perspective, the things that we see in our world that are not working right now, for example, the autoimmune dysfunction called warfare, where healthy cells are mobilized by manipulators against other healthy cells, and we end up spending our, half our resource to either destroy one another or to prevent somebody from destroying us. We can no longer afford to do this if we're going to survive as a species.
You give a vivid demonstration of this in the book, don't you? Where you're talking about, you mentioned if the body did this and one of the cells, if we had cancer in the liver, what's that? Do you remember that analogy? It was really poignant.
Well, I think if we look at the political standpoint, if our body did what we did, let's say in responding to terrorism, one organ would declare war on another organ, and you never hear about the liver invading the pancreas, demanding the islets of Langerhans. It just doesn't happen. What the body does is it isolates the pathogens, so consequently the body politic would want to isolate the sociopathogens, the forces in society that are out only for themselves and not for the benefit of anybody or everybody.
Absolutely.
So this is a new way of looking at the world, and then of course what unfolds from that is, well, if we are in fact on the cusp of this evolution, why does everything seem to be falling apart? And another useful biological metaphor is the transformation of the caterpillar into the butterfly. And during that process, the caterpillar is deconstructing. It's this melting goo, and very confusing, I'm sure, to all the cells involved. But while the caterpillar is falling apart, these new cells, called imaginal cells, are beginning to communicate with one another and cluster together. And this seems to be what's happening right now, that there is a community of human cells. Paul Ray called this group the cultural creatives, now comprising about 30 to 35% of adult Americans, who recognize this new paradigm.
Well, it is recorded scientifically, too, even though we can't believe all science, because they're run also by grants and various other things. But it has been proven that humans remain stagnant for millions of years, and then they make an evolutionary jump, and then thousands of years later, there's the next leap, and it seems to be almost instantaneous.
The evolutionists call this punctuated equilibrium, where there's a steady plateau and then something happens. And usually in the past, what's happened has been some hurtling body from outer space that created such a cataclysm that the old species needed to either adapt immediately to new situations or die off. In fact, something very recently, there was once again that speculation that it was some meteorite that wiped out the dinosaurs. So at this point, though, it's not it's not debris from outer space that we are endangered by. It's the debris from inner space. It's our own beliefs, our own dysfunctional and obsolete beliefs in lowest common denominator, in the idea that might does make right, in the idea that only the physical world exists, as the current scientific paradigm suggests to us, and the belief that evolution is a random process, when in actuality evolution is an intelligent learning process engaged in by life.
Well, is it then important to see a connection between our own lives and the larger scale events that we see happening all over the world? In other words, as you said, we can't do something. What we're seeing outside is not something that's disassociated from us entirely. We have to be responsible for it, starting with going within, I would think. Yes.
Well, yeah, and part of what we talk about in the book is fractals, and fractals, to oversimplify, is simply representing the repeating patterns of nature, the self-similar repeating patterns of nature. So a simple example is if you look at an aerial view of a shoreline, the patterns, the way the shore goes in and out and so on, is very similar to looking at it from looking at the ocean standing right there. So nature tends to repeat patterns over and over again, and so if we look at these self-similar patterns, we can see that the same things that hold true for being healthy or unhealthy for a cell are true for the individual, are true for the community, are true for humanity and for the planet. So if we begin to look at the things that we do every day, the things that we use, how we spend our time, how we spend our money, what we put our attention on, and we begin to recognize not just the impact that these have on us short term, but the impact that they have on our bodies, ourselves, our communities, our children, their children, etc. The Native American people and most indigenous folks really looked at 7 generations forward and 7 generations backward, that an action that we have today, like a pebble that's dropped in the water, has a ripple effect going backward 7 generations and forward 7 generations. So part of this is, number one, is to recognize the relationship between what we do and how we spend our time with the impact it's going to have. On a more positive note, it also gives us the opportunity to look at what our own personal gifts and talents and tendencies and skills and things that we love to do and missions and visions, and how to weave that with the larger picture, the larger evolving new organism called humanity.
One of the things that I have a problem with routinely is getting hung up on the 3D world that I see with my 5 senses, and the enormous incongruities such as genetically modified food. I think you mentioned Monsanto in the books briefly.
Yeah, a little section called Monsanto Claus is coming to town.
Would you like to talk a little bit about that, by the way?
Well, why don't you finish your thought, and then
I'll
speak to all of that.
The rampant theft that's going on by the Federal Reserve, which is neither federal nor a reserve, it's basically a gang of banksters taking over the political world and the structure and sucking the money out like a Hoover vacuum cleaner. So, we see these things going on, and the effort to depose anybody that's positive that wants to try to change, and they get slaughtered and replaced by somebody that's corruptible and does bad things at our request. So how do we begin to feel like there's some kind of personal power in rooting out this disease of psychopathy that you mentioned earlier?
Well, let's go back a